evacuation! You must leave!
For many people, Harvey is far from over.
People here believe the water will be this deep for weeks.
I'm Greg Milam, and I'm Sky's Chief North of England correspondent.
Are you trying to run me over, Sir Philip?
No, go away.
Look like it, sir. Will you respond to those who made accusations, Sir Philip?
Can you go away?
Sky News, the full story first.
Welcome back. You are watching Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview. A first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. But first, our top stories. One of Donald Trump's senior advisors says the US president has multifold reasons to be frustrated with Ukraine's leader, whom he's called a dictator, and said Ukraine needed to sign a deal giving America a share in some of its mineral wealth. A coroner has ruled that the Army's failure to properly investigate complaints of sexual abuse contributed to the suicide of Royal Artillery gunner Jaisley Beck. There have been a series of explosions on buses in Israel tonight in what police say appears to be a militant attack. No injuries have been reported. You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages of the newspapers as they arrive. It's time to see what's making the headlines with ConservativeHome's deputy editor, Henry Hill, and The Guardian's deputy political editor, Jessica Elgott. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. The Financial Times leads with the ongoing tensions between Ukraine and the United States, with Washington objecting to its G7 allies describing Russia as the aggressor in the war with Ukraine. A warning from the Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, that the West should not be fooled by Putin's attempts to dress up imperialism as pragmatism. That's on the front of The Guardian. The Eye hears there's pressure on the Prime Minister to raise the UK's defence spending to 3% of GDP. The Metro has the story of 19-year-old soldier Jaisley Beck. A coroner ruled today that she took her own life following repeated sexual harassment by a senior colleague. The Express quotes Jaisley's mother speaking about the army. No apology will ever bring our daughter back. An image of Daniel Craig as James Bond is on the Times front page. But the paper leads with the Prime Minister's plan to offer European countries an Australian-style youth mobility scheme. The Mail focuses on figures from the worlds of music, media and film, backing its campaign to protect Britain's creative industries from the threat of AI. The Telegraph has seen evidence suggesting that records of misconduct by doctors can be inadvertently erased if they change gender. An image of the former BBC presenter Hugh Edwards dominates the front of The Sun with the headline, "Cough Up Hugh." The Mirror says an extra 700,000 people will get emergency dental appointments after a campaign by the paper for dentists for all. And The Star looks ahead to a decidedly mixed weather forecast tomorrow. Sunshine in the south, but snow in the north. And we're joined tonight by Henry Hill and Jessica Elgott. Welcome to both of you. Let's start with Ukraine and the FT, front page there. The headline, Washington opposes phrase Russian aggression in G7 Ukraine statement. Henry, there's lots more behind this story, but take us into what the FT is saying.
Yeah, essentially, hoping my voice holds up. Essentially what's happened is, throughout this conflict, the G7 has been clear, for very obvious reasons, that this is a Russian-initiated war, right? Russia has invaded Ukraine. The clue is that it's being fought on Ukrainian territory and that Russian forces currently occupy about 20% of Ukraine's sovereign territory. Yet, after Donald Trump's extraordinary intervention this week, where he seemed to suggest that actually he doesn't view it that way, the Americans are now trying to prevent the latest G7 statement referring to Russian aggression. Instead, they're trying to pivot towards terminology calling it the Ukraine conflict, which obviously mysteriously sort of makes it sound as if it's something that's just happened. It doesn't identify the other party at all. Now, this seems to be Donald Trump's strategy of buttering up the Russians, presumably in the hope that he can secure a deal that will allow for the withdrawal of American support and a freezing of the conflict at bare minimum. But it's nonetheless extraordinary language, given that America has shifted so much and it's offered so much to the Kremlin, and in exchange, so far, the Russians haven't offered anything back. There's been no goodwill out of Russia. There's been no gesture from Putin. So he's banking all of these concessions. And now America is still trying to undermine the work of other allies to signal very clearly that Ukraine is the victim, Russia is the aggressor.
And Jessica, this comes in the context of Donald Trump saying that Zelensky is a dictator and that Ukraine started the war.
Yeah, and just to put what some of Henry was saying into context, this statement has been issued every year around February 24th, which is the anniversary of the conflict. Last year, Russian aggression was mentioned 5 times in that statement. So to withdraw it completely just shows you how much the sands have shifted and how much the effect of Donald Trump in the White House has meant for support for Ukraine. I mean, broadly speaking, the rest of the G7 nations are not backing down on this. It sounds like the FT's got 5 sources from 5 different nations who were saying that this is something that they find to be totally unacceptable. But for now, you can just, you're seeing the way that he described Zelensky as a dictator yesterday, the push, the demands for £500 billion worth of mineral wealth resources from Ukraine, which is supposedly payback for, I think it's roughly about $60 billion worth of support from the US for the war. If you're President Zelensky, things are starting to look very desperate.
Especially when we know that they traditionally publish a support of Ukraine on February the 24th every year. This is completely thrown up in the air.
Exactly, and obviously Ukraine's war effort is, for all the heroism of its people, dependent on American, Western, but particularly American support, material, money, and so there must be a real fear now in Kyiv about what happens if. And previously, this would have been unthinkable. What happens if the Americans just pull the rug completely? Because we've seen, for all the high rhetoric that's come out of Europe denouncing, and we're going to get onto that, I think, denouncing Donald Trump, that Europe is not an alternative to an American support, right? We've given Ukraine most of the equipment that we currently have. Other European countries, Germany and Poland, have said they are not going to send even peacekeeping troops to Ukraine. So the best case scenario, and there's always a danger of trying to sort of decode Donald Trump because you risk maybe making a more reasonable case than he is actually making. But if you think about it, if he's determined to drive through any deal just so he can be the person who secured peace, Russia would potentially be okay with freezing the conflict on current borders, which would mean it's kept control of Crimea and the Donbass. Ukraine has said that it will not accept peace on those terms, right? It will not accept peace that involves ceding its sovereign territory. So therefore, from Trump's perspective, he maybe sees Zelensky as a sticking point, and he's trying to bring as much pressure to bear as possible. But either way, it is absolutely extraordinary given the sacrifices Ukrainians have made and all the support that the America and other Western countries have given them. Because if this was going to end up being the position, I mean, America, we could have just pulled the rug out from under them years ago, and at least hundreds of thousands of people would still be alive, right? It's an extraordinary betrayal.
And I think that the one card that you hold if you're President Zelensky, and it's a very high-stakes one, is that if Trump does want to be seen as this deal-maker, if he does want to be the one who brought peace to the region and kind of get all the kudos of that, which is the kind of thing that he likes to be, then you need the Ukrainians to accept a deal. So you can't. So if you can then potentially pull the rug and say, let the Russians march into Kyiv. But at the moment, it looks like Trump actually wants to do a deal to stop the war. So therefore, he needs him to find something to agree to.
All the efforts are being put into stopping the war internationally. And we know that Sir Keir Starmer and President Macron are travelling to Washington next week. The Telegraph, looking at the line that Macron will actually challenge Trump over his weakness towards Russia. That's what's being reported.
Yeah, and this really highlights how difficult a position Keir Starmer is in, because Donald Trump is a very thin-skinned man. Part of the reason that he's going so hard on President Zelensky is that he just doesn't like the way that President Zelensky has been talking to him, or what the things that he said about him. And so, on the one hand, there is a potential there with that meeting next week for Britain to act in its traditional capacity as a sort of bridge between Europe and America. But on the other hand, how do you do that whilst still conveying to Donald Trump the message that you think his position on Russia is profoundly wrong and self-defeating? Macron's position will play very well in Europe. It's morally correct, but it's not going to get him any meetings in Washington, and it's probably not going to change any views in the White House. So it's a question of whether or not Keir Starmer, with the more diplomatic approach that London has taken so far, can get results.
Yeah, and I think Number 10's position, even before all of this happened, was that the only way to win round Donald Trump was flattery, and that's the strategy that they've constantly pursued.
Well, they're certainly
all
not
the
being
way through it.
criticising
no,
at all.
There was a hint in that call with Zelensky that Keir Starmer had yesterday. He said to him in the sort of second paragraph of it that he did not think he was a dictator, and reminded him that Britain didn't hold elections during the Second World War, or at least the vast majority of it. So that was the reason that he, that's a kind of maybe an underhand statement of support that criticises something Donald Trump's saying. But, that's as far as Keir Starmer's prepared to go publicly, at least so far. And that he seems to believe that, you can win more flies with honey.
It is going to be a tall order for Sir Keir Starmer, though, isn't it? Because one of the things he will want to say to Donald Trump is that this insistence there needs to be a US backstop if there are British peacekeeping forces within Ukraine. Donald Trump has said categorically there will be no American boots on the ground, so he has to convince him of that.
Yeah, this is another challenge for Sir Keir Starmer, because, of course, just a few weeks ago it was reported that military chiefs were telling him even the British couldn't do it alone, even a peacekeeping mission. We simply do not have enough deployable troops to peacekeep that entire border. Now, there were two alternatives, therefore. There was a sort of Anglo-American force, potentially with others, or there was a European force. Unfortunately, currently, both of those are off the table. Trump has said he won't put troops on the ground, as you say, and on the other hand, Germany, it was a bit meaningless, but Poland, which actually has a large deployable military, has also said that it won't put troops on the ground, and therefore Britain... Exactly. So Britain's in the sort of slightly odd position of being the only one willing to send troops that it doesn't have, whilst the various countries that have troops aren't willing to send them, which, from Ukraine's perspective, must be sort of bleakly comic. But yeah, absolutely, he needs to build one coalition or the other, because otherwise it looks like grandstanding. And I think one of the challenges that any British Prime Minister would have in Washington is Trump can say, well, you've been free-riding off us, right? Like, why don't you have enough troops to do this? Why don't you have enough troops even to go and stand there once I've negotiated this peace? That's going to be very difficult.
Even if we give you a backstop, which is one of the things...
Yeah, but there are also divisions within European leaders, because Olaf Scholz is saying that he found it irritating that Sir Keir Starmer was even raising the prospect of providing peacekeeping troops, and this wasn't the time to be discussing that.
I think it would be very unlikely to see Germany make that commitment, perhaps at all, but particularly not immediately before some elections. I think the point that you could argue with that is that if we are by making this commitment this early before there's even anything on the table, it's like, how do we know that this is the deal that we're prepared to agree to, or prepared to defend? It felt, I think, to quite a few European capitals that it was premature to kind of come in behind the US and in behind this deal to make peace before we knew any of those terms.
Well, the British government definitely haven't been critical of President Trump, but in the Guardian, David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary, critical of President Putin. The West should not be fooled by Vladimir Putin's attempts to dress up imperialism as pragmatism in advance of any talks on the future of Ukraine. Yeah, and again, you can see the Foreign Secretary there threading the needle of trying to distance London from Washington's new position on the Russo-Ukrainian war without directly riling President Trump ahead of the Prime Minister's meeting. And it also highlights just how difficult any settlement is going to be, because, of course, I mentioned that Ukraine's position is that they want a peace that respects their status quo ante borders. But the Russian position is also very tricky, because at the start of the war, you could just about envision a settlement where maybe they withdrew to the borders before 2021, right? They went back to the
People's Republic of Donetsk and Luhansk, or whatever it was in the east, and they kept Crimea de facto. No one recognised it. But the problem now is that I think last year, or maybe in 2023, President Putin annexed all the territory currently occupied in eastern Ukraine. He made it formally part of the Russian Federation. Now, that makes it vastly more difficult, probably impossible, for his regime to now cede that territory back, which means that the only deal I expect the Russians will accept is a frozen conflict along the current border. And the question is that going to be acceptable to the Ukrainians?
Jessica, just because we're running out of time, can we quickly look at the Times and Elon Musk slamming Zelensky?
Yeah, and Elon Musk and Zelensky have clashed in the past, dating way back, way beyond before he was so closely associated with Trump. And he called him, in language that sort of typically goes even further than Donald Trump, says it calls him a massive graft machine feeding off the dead bodies of Ukrainian soldiers. And, that's the kind of thing, when President Zelensky has lost so many of his countrymen in battle, to kind of say that he's deliberately prolonging this war, deliberately putting lives at risk. It comes off the back of this joint press conference that was supposed to be between Zelensky and Donald Trump's envoy that was cancelled in Washington today. So it's really been a quite a bleak 24 hours, and the war of words that's flying across the Atlantic is really something to behold.
Indeed, indeed. Henry and Jessica, thank you very much for the moment. We can take a break. Coming up, coroner rules that failings by the army in responding to sexual harassment and assault contributed to a young soldier taking her own life. We'll discuss that next.
Sunday, the Premier League is exclusively on Peacock. The league's most dynamic scorers square off.
Goal for Haaland!
Erling Haaland and Man City.
Fantastic goal!
Mo Salah and Liverpool.
Time after time, he is Liverpool shining lights.
This is the Premier League.
That's just stunning!
Sunday, only on Peacock.
I'm David Blevins, and I'm Sky's senior Ireland correspondent.
It takes 60 minutes to cross the Irish Sea. It took the British monarchy a century.
I've spent 30 years reporting the journey from conflict to peace.
The political parties of Northern Ireland have reached agreement.
If there's anyone who might know how to fix Northern Ireland's devolved government, it's the American architect.
Changes in circumstance require changes in approach.
The end of the political stalemate, the start of a new chapter for Northern Ireland.
I confirmed that I am willing to take up the office of First Minister. My election to the post of First Minister demonstrates the change that's happening on this island.
Catholics and Protestants on different sides, now facing the same threat.
If we both contract COVID-19 and end up in hospital, religion's nothing.
People here are adept at finding hope amid adversity. That's the spirit of a place that punches way above its weight.
We help you understand the world with us. A toxic blue-green algae now poisoning Loch Ness. It's breaking your heart what has happened here.
It is.
This is a vital resource, a national treasure, now fighting for its very life. They are effectively surrounded by Northern Ireland, and that makes this the most unlikely of international frontiers.
If there's a hard border, I think it'll cripple the country.
Winter is coming. Welcome to Winterfell. It's an iconic location in this globally acclaimed drama. Ophelia was the most powerful hurricane this far east in the Atlantic on record. Sky News, the full story first.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people. Welcome to the Politics Hub.
Our police force has apologised. If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war?
Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here?
You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.
we've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Welcome back. You are watching the press preview. Still with me, Henry Hill and Jessica Elgott. Let us take a look at the Metro and this terribly sad story, the findings of a coroner into the death of 19-year-old Jaisley Beck. Hounded to her death is the headline. She took her own life after various incidents, bosses bombarding her with 4,600 texts, sexual assault also. Jessica.
I mean, this is one of those stories that you hope will really herald a kind of a culture change or a deep internal soul searching for the culture in the military, particularly for young women. She's just 19 years old, and when you hear the kind of extent of the evidence that was presented at the inquest about how the volume of stuff that she was subjected to, and of course, then you got the headline that on the Daily Express and that her mum said, which is that no apology will ever bring our daughter back. But I hope, I'm sure we all hope that it goes well beyond an apology. What happens next when it comes to the interrogation of how things should change?
Well, one of the contributors to the report that we did on this, one of her previous colleagues in the army, was saying that the army is simply not safe. It's not a safe space for women.
Yeah, it's extraordinary, given, as you say, the volume of evidence that there was available to the inquest. She did complain, right? This isn't one of those things where nobody knew anything about it until the tragedy happened and then it all spilled out into the open. She complained. She did the right thing. She complained to her superiors. That should then have been taken care of. And I think, obviously, the best that you can ever hope comes out of anything like this is that it is at least a catalyst for reform so that the same thing doesn't happen again. And what I really want to hear from the army is how on earth was this conduct not considered? How was it not actioned? Right? The official thing is, the complaint she made was that a senior officer pinned her down and put his hands between her legs. In what universe, in any workplace, anywhere, is that not something that gets, an immediate temporary suspension, a full investigation? Right? I just want to know how the officer who received that report, what he was thinking, what the process was that led to nothing happening, because it's extraordinary. It actually boggles the mind that anyone in a modern professional workplace of any description could have overlooked that.
And so her family say, whatever, there's no apology that can bring their daughter back. Just finally we're going to the Mirror, and this story about dentists, the promise that everyone who needs one will now have access to a dentist. Good news, Jessica.
Yeah, I mean, certainly good news. And in certain parts of the country, this has been an extraordinarily difficult problem. You think getting a dentist appointment should be one of those very easy, routine things. And you hear particularly people in rural areas having to kind of, if they can't go to a private dentist, then they're having to wait for months, years to even get on the list of a dentist, never mind get an appointment. And, people living in extreme pain or even, God forbid, taking matters into their own hands when it comes to trying to dislodge their own teeth.
Pulling their own teeth, yes, we've heard terrible stories of that. But, Henry, just got about 30 seconds. 700,000 people will be seen now.
It's better than nothing. Obviously, an announcement is not the same as rollout, and we'll have to see. But the problem with NHS dentistry is chronic, it is vast, and it arises from the simple problem, which is that we can't, the NHS budget is what it is. Wes Streeting does not have the money to fix it permanently. He's not been given it. And in any system, you have to ration through queues or price. And in Britain, we ration through queues.
Henry and Jessica, thank you. We'll see you in the top of the 11 in a minute. Let's take a look at the weather for you now. Well, the next few days will be mild with spells of wind and rain, but Saturday doesn't look too bad. Tomorrow, expect a cloudy, mild and wet start for most, with strong winds bringing gusts up to 70 miles per hour in the west. There'll be outbreaks of rain through the morning, locally heavy, but central and eastern England look mainly dry, with sunny spells. It'll be very mild again, but windy, with coastal gales for areas surrounding the Irish Sea. The afternoon will see rain easing eastwards to become confined to northern Scotland and southeast England later on. That'll leave sunshine and just a few showers elsewhere. The strong wind will ease going into the evening. Saturday looks mainly dry. Coming up next on Sky News at 11, Donald Trump keeps up his war of words against Ukraine's President Zelensky. His advisors say he wants some of the country's mineral wealth.
I saw police being forceful, pushing young men and women to the ground as they made almost 100 arrests. Will the cold affect your voters?
Well, we have a lot of tremendous support.
Free, wherever you get your news. The people here know that worse storms may well be on their way. I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles.
Mandatory evacuation, you must leave!
For many people, Harvey is far from over.
People here believe the water will be this deep for weeks.
I'm Greg Milam and I'm Sky's chief North of England correspondent.
Are you trying to run me over, Sir Philip?
No, go away.
Look like it, sir. Will you respond to those who made accusations, Sir Philip?
Can you go away?
Sky News, the full story first.